Welcome to The Craft. I'm your host, May Globus. This podcast is a collection of intimate conversations on artistry, mastery, and life with talented, passionately curious creatives and entrepreneurs. Most are dear friends, some are those I've admired from afar. I hope you enjoy these conversations, this exploration of the humanity that connects all of us, as much as I do having them. Thank you for being here and for listening. This episode is sponsored by Happy Fox Health, a natural supplement brand focused on sea moss, a marine algae that has 92 out of 102 essential nutrients that your body needs to thrive and regenerate. I've used a number of their products and found it's really given me clarity of mind. Visit happyfoxhealth.com and use promo code THECRAFT for an exclusive 15 to 20% discount off your first product purchase. As a number of you know, I'm also a certified sound therapy practitioner and founder of Oto Healing, a sound therapy studio and practice. Sound has been a healing modality through many cultures for thousands of years. Oto's approach to sound is rooted in both art and science, the art being the history of sound, the science being quantum physics, biology, brainwave states, and more. All listeners of the show get 15% off their first private 1-hour session. Visit otohealing.com to book yours now. Pennylane Shen is the consummate conversationalist. To get into a discussion with her is to go deep into all topics. The artist consultant and founder of Dazed Confucius has spent decades in the art world, particularly in the fine art space, working in galleries, teaching, and now guiding artists around the globe as they refine their practices. She grew up mostly in Vancouver, the precocious daughter of Chinese immigrant parents. From a young age, she was strong-headed and a rule breaker, at times to the chagrin of her traditional father and mother. Born from a wild imagination, Pennylane had the ability to draw and make when she was a child, practicing her art over and over. This artist leaning took her to the University of Toronto to get her fine arts degree, and then to NYU to do a master's degree. A visa expiration brought her back to Vancouver, among other reasons, where she continued to work at galleries while doing private artist consultations on the side. In 2016, she finally fully pivoted into her consulting work with Dazed and Confucius. In this conversation, we explore the dynamic between her and her parents during her early years, the ways her chapter living in New York opened her and challenged her, what to keep in mind when building a budding art collection, and what makes a meaningful collection, the emerging new wave of POC collectors, how artists can build a strong career and what traits they should embrace in order to succeed, why intention, practice, and context are essential when critiquing art, an examination of curation, what's exciting her and disheartening her about the art world, one question every artist should ask themselves, and much more. Please enjoy this very open and honest conversation with the incredibly brilliant and bold Pennylane Shen. Pennylane Shen, welcome to The Craft.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
Me too. You and I have had several great conversations that have lasted very long times. So I can't wait to bring some of this into the studio and share this with other people.
I really hope other people like it too.
How have you been?
I've been good. I had a wonderful summer away in Ireland, Scotland, England, and it's been tough to be back, of course, in different ways, for different reasons. But the fall and Halloween, my favorite holiday, is coming up, so that's always a positive.
Yeah. Are you dressing up? Are you a costume person?
I am a costume person, very much so. Quite hardcore costume person. But this year, it's on a Monday. It lands on a Monday, so it's a bit, it's not the best day for Halloween, right?
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
And you've got one planned?
No, I never really plan until very close to the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then I go into the tickle trunk and dig out things and
I love that.
do some FX makeup on and yeah.
Oh, wow.
I try to make it scary. I like it a bit scary.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I remember one year, the wife of an acquaintance showed up at a Halloween party, and it was the most grotesque the way that she did her makeup. It was like
a zipper. Yeah. That's classic.
Yeah.
That's in the tickle trunk as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's go back into your history. So
Okay.
you grew up in Vancouver, but then you moved to the interior. So take me back. Take me back to childhood. What was it like? What were you like?
Sure. Yeah, when I was young, I definitely was quite precocious, I think. A bit of a handful for my immigrant parents who had just moved here and were poor and, had hung on to the wing of the airplane, as they say. Literally, they say that to get here. And I think that I maybe straddled that line between a like good Asian daughter who played piano and tried to do well at math, to being quite precocious. So, loud and sneaky and vivacious and rule breaking, those types of things, as opposed to my brother, who is 10 years older than me, who is very, very, very different from me. And I'm sure that had to do with my Canadian upbringing, and being a person of color in a space that didn't have that for a while. Now it very much does, and kind of trying to find my place and not really figuring that out probably until university, and still today. So.
Yeah. And with you being that way, what was the dynamic like with your parents then? You being this sort of like vivacious rule breaker and them being immigrant parents.
Yeah, rocky, I think. As naturally it would be. But to be honest, I think over time I just sort of wore them down, and the country and being here sort of wore them down as well. And I think sort of seeing that being that way didn't affect the things that they cared about, which was, again, grades and conventionality in some ways, like a conventionally healthy person. And once they saw that that wasn't sort of an issue, and that that strong-headedness could also be seen as ambition, and that the rule breaking could also be seen as risk taking, and there were good sides to all those qualities, that they kind of mellowed out a bit. But I also moved away, so
That's
a
right.
lot of that, yeah. So when you move away and you come back, things are different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that for sure. And if you were going to tell me a bit more about your dad and your mom and tell me about what they're like, I'd love to know.
Okay. This is like the first time anybody has ever asked me this. Certainly in a public space. My dad is very like militantly on time and rule following and by the book, and he's logical and that side practical. My mom is much more like free spirited and scattered in other ways as well. She also is schizophrenic, so that's also which is something that came up later in her life, which of course throws things off for sure for her. Like, and so her personality is manic sometimes, and but she's always been much more free spirited, and even though she is still part of that kind of conventional box of an Asian parent, a stereotypical way. And yeah, so they're very yin and yang in that way. Yeah.
And you see bits of yourself in them, or did you sort of?
For sure, definitely.
Yeah, I guess we all do.
Yeah, I think
we try to break away, and then we're like, oh, actually.
Yeah, for sure. My most, you pay for therapy, and in the end, they're like, well, this comes down to your dad issues, and you're like, oh, great. Like I was hoping it was something else, but it's always your parents in some way, and then you're like, oh, come on. Like I want to be slightly different, but it really does boil down to to them,
Yeah.
no surprise. Like, I guess every single book on therapy was right. It really is them.
And tell me about you. What were you like as a kid and as a teen?
So again, that rebellious phase still continued on as a teen. I wanted to go into the arts, and I was always interested in the arts, which is really a parent's nightmare, I think, particularly my parents, and I think particularly Asian parents' nightmare. But by some freak chance, I was able to pursue that, but only if I sort of pursued it in an adjacent way. So I was able to go to a university that allowed me to do basically 2 degrees at once, which was like a BFA and a BA. So I did English Lit and visual culture theory. And
this was in Toronto, right?
That's right. Yeah, at U of T. And then I was able to do like studio classes at Sheridan. So your standard foundations courses for 4 years, photography, design, painting, drawing, etc. So I always found like a workaround around that. And then when I went on to do my master's, it wasn't an MFA, it was an MA, but it was in, again, visual and identity studies. So there were all these kind of other ways I was able to integrate something like art into something that was acceptable or perhaps more practical for my parents to swallow.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's so interesting. I was just, as you were talking, I was like, oh yes, it's like checking off boxes. Like that's, like I can put that in a conventional box and then it'll be okay with mom and dad. Yeah, I understand that experience quite well.
I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
And yeah, which I guess serendipitously or ironically, it worked out better that way for me to not have gone full blown into the making of the work, because the making of the work is what turns out I was a lot less interested in than talking about the work.
And this interest in art, I assume this came at a young age. So where did this come from?
I don't know. I guess I always had like the ability to sort of draw and be creative and make when I was young. I did it quite a lot, and that wasn't discouraged by my parents. I wouldn't say it was encouraged, but they were, they were impressed by it. They liked it, and it certainly kept me busy. I had no trouble keeping to myself and just making things, drawing things, creating things, destroying them and rebuilding them. Like I could entertain myself for hours and hours with that. So that was never a problem. They never tried to take that away from me. And so I think that just continued on in my life, and this attraction or this draw to aesthetics.
Right. So it wasn't something that they did. It was something that you had sort of naturally developed on your own.
I had a really wild imagination, and that needed some type of outlet.
Yeah.
And, I spent a lot of time by myself. I was parked in front of the TV a lot, but that TV channel was a lot of these like crafting, making things. And I was glued to that, I would write these multi-noveled like comic books that I would make as a little kid, 4, 5, 6 years old, where I'd do series, like volumes.
Wow.
And I don't know that many kids that do that. I used to do studies of work. So I would do 4, 5, 6 versions of something, the same image, because I felt like it could be better. And
okay.
Yeah, I think that speaks to some weird OCD stuff, but I think it also speaks to, the fact that I was pretty dedicated to it. It wasn't kind of a one and done thing.
Yeah, you talking about this now, I'll put a pin in this, but I'll mention it so I'm saying it out loud and I won't forget it. But what you're talking about now reminds me of a few things that you said during your Creative Mornings presentation around the second pillar. I feel like the global theme for it was critical. And you had 3 sort of pillars that you you operate by from this lens. And what you're talking about sort of reminds me of the second one. But we can talk about that later. I
Sure.
do want to ask about that for sure. But I do want to know about your chapter in New York. That's where you did your master's before coming back here.
That's right.
But tell me more. Tell me the story of your experience there.
Sure.
And how it opened you up, how it challenged you, all of those things.
Yeah, definitely. It's a funny story and a funny time. I had come back to Vancouver, having lived in Toronto for 5 years at that point, and from ages 17 to 22, and went to school there. So I left here like straight out of high school, basically, and I had an apartment here. And when I returned, I didn't fully think that I was going to return, but it just sort of, okay, we're done school. It's a natural thing to do. Came back and then felt very, start working at galleries as per usual, and felt very unsettled. And then still had all these kind of burning questions in my mind about, I felt like I just scratched the surface of some of the things that we began talking about in visual culture. I should say that in my final 2 years at U of T, we were able to take a new course called Visual Culture Theory instead of the art history classes. So it counted for the same thing. So of course I was like, oh, I'll give this a try. Had a little taste of it, loved it, scrapped all the other art history courses, not all of them, but and then went full blown into this. So took courses in post-colonial theory, in new media studies, in consumerism culture, in identity and race politics. Like these were all and how images make meaning, in other words. Mm-hmm. And I found that really exciting. And then it just ended, and then back to Vancouver. And so I flipped over all the texts that we had, and just took a look at who are these folks that wrote these texts. And what I found is that they were all in one place, and that was at NYU. And I think I flipped open my laptop and did a quick Google search and saw that they were putting together a new program, a master's program, in this very thing. So I applied, got in, and went there, and there was maybe 8 other folks in it as well, all from different parts of the world and the US. And we truly did guinea pig the program. So for better, for worse, mostly for worse, I'd say. There were a lot of kinks to work out. And I felt very much on my own. Learned great stuff, but it was a very much a like piece it together on your own. So a few courses from here, a few courses from there, So I took courses in all the different subjects. So from political science, I took a course. From film studies, I took a course. From East Asian studies, I took a course. So, and then I made something out of it at the end, a thesis,
okay.
right? To defend. And all the while also trying to enjoy the city and experience New York, which was also very hard to do. And when I lived there, I lived in quite a rough neighborhood in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and
before it was cool,
way before. It was starting to get cool for sure, and I could feel it. But it was still a little rough around the edges for sure. At this time, this was quite a long time ago now, but it was also the time of the Olympics being in China. It was also the time of the stock market crash. So Wall Street was really interesting. It was also Obama being elected.
So what was the air like there? The atmosphere, like the energy?
It was so frenzied. It was really exciting. I mean, I went to see Obama rally at Washington Square Park in front of the school. It was like something was happening at any moment, and trying to kind of experience that while straddling school and staying afloat or alive was hard. And my entire experience there, I feel like, was a bit of a whirlwind. This was a few years, and only really in my final year did I start to feel a little bit more settled and that's pretty much when I had to leave, visa wise. I had to get out of there. So, and I worked for a year after there as well. Um, yeah, it was tough. I
You wanted to stay.
I did. At the end, the entire time I wanted to get out of there. It was hard being a lot of things, but it was hard being poor. It was hard being Canadian. A little bit, it was hard being young and in a very intensive school. It was hard being unsupported by that school. A lot of different things, and finding oneself and wanting to have fun and wanting to do well still, because you've just spent so much money being there. Yeah, it was a really interesting time. I also, as like a side note, like lived above a dead body for a year, and
What?
that
oh my
was
gosh.
yes.
So someone passed in the.
Yes.
Could you smell it?
Oh yes, for a year, and it got really bad.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So.
Ugh.
And basically discovered it. Anyway, I don't need to get in that. It's a it's a good story though, but that is a story for another time.
For another day.
A pretty wild one, but yeah, it seemed like a short amount of time, but many things happened, and many things happened in the world at that time. And honestly, things like 9/11 and it was very felt.
So it was time to come home for various reasons.
Yeah, I don't know if I would have. I did not unpack my bags, actually. I did not unpack my suitcase for, I think, maybe 6 months or so after, of course I'd pull things out here and there, but it didn't feel like, it felt temporary coming back.
Okay.
It felt, and then, and that was 12 years ago.
Right. And then life happened.
Exactly. And
Right.
yeah, it was a matter of, it felt sleepy here, and sometimes it still does. And so everything that I had just spent time working on, it wasn't something that I felt like was in the air, I guess. It wasn't the zeitgeist. And keep in mind too that the last time I had properly lived here in Vancouver was when I was in high school, right? So I had grown up in that time, I guess, and my friends were of like a different group. Wonderful, but our interests are different.
Yeah, you evolved. You had a whole other experience that changed you, and obviously you'll come back so different. And
For sure.
yeah,
And as somebody,
with a different perspective too,
Totally.
right? Living in a different city with so much vibrancy and so much multiculturalism and just so much art and culture that just it hits you in the face there, where
It does.
you sort of need to seek it out in a city like Vancouver.
Sure.
On a you just have to put more effort
You
to
do.
find it.
You do. And I was in academia, hard, like very deeply in academia. And that's a bubble of its own, which I think is problematic for different reasons. But when you're out of that bubble, you feel it a lot. You're just so engrossed in it, right? You're surrounded by talking about these subjects that are heavy. Well, they don't even seem heavy at the time because you're in it. And then it just stops completely. There's a hard stop, and that silence can be deafening almost.
Yeah.
And as everybody knows, it's hard to build a community or a circle of friends. This as well may having lived here later on as later in your adulthood, right? I think finding those people, you're very good at it. So but finding those people with like-minded interests, it took time as well. And so there was definitely a period here when I first returned where I just felt lonely, I think, in different ways.
I'd love to, not love to, but I'm curious, does the chapter in New York feel somewhat unfinished, or did you ever feel that way? Or were you more like, no, you came home and that was what was supposed to happen and there was a piece around that?
Yeah, I think I almost wouldn't phrase it as I came home. I think I would say I came back to Vancouver, which hadn't felt like home. And then I made that place my home. So I wouldn't say it's unfinished. I feel like that chapter has closed, but it's also taken over a decade for that to happen. When I came back, I remember talking to somebody and basically they said, well, you can leave and come back when these things are happening in the city, like when it becomes part of our cultural social fabric to discuss certain issues and see art in our on our walls and in our galleries and in our homes, and to see topics and people speak about people of color and all these things. Or so you can come back, and because it will happen and you can see it, or you can stay and make it happen and contribute to making it happen. And so something shifted there for me, and I decided that I would stick around and, try to take matters into my own hands a little bit and make things happen.
Yeah, I know there is this, sometimes I get this pang. I have a friend of mine who, she and her husband split their time, and they're quite involved in arts and culture in New York. And she had posted something the other day on Instagram, and she had seen the new piece at the New York City Ballet, and it was the performance piece that Solange Knowles had created, an orchestral piece to go along with the dancing. And I remember that pang because I had heard about this show, and I had seen her when she performed at the Rennie Museum.
Wow. Yeah.
And when she had come into town, I think maybe 5 years ago or so. And I remember that pang of, I really wish I'd be able to see something like that. But I also resonate with what you're saying too, where you're like, well, then be part of making that happen here, or be part of that fabric that allows that to be the way that it could be here.
Absolutely. And I definitely think you do that, May.
I hope so, in my own little way. I hope that you do.
And I think that maybe those opportunities would be more difficult for us there, just because of resources and competition, other sorts of things. So I try to think about that. It's a real, not so much grass is always greener, but wherever you are, there you are kind of thing. And so I try to keep that in mind. But I have FOMO out the wazoo, and I have a lot of constant pangs. As you know, I practice like leisurely anxiety. So Instagram is the worst for that too.
Totally. Oh,
right?
Absolutely. So let's go now that you're here in Vancouver. What did you start to do? I know that you were teaching and you were kind of consulting, and you were doing all these things to build this life and career for yourself here.
Sure. I actually started in galleries. So I went back to what I knew most, which is what I did in undergrad. When I was 18, I worked in art galleries. And that was my first serious my first serious job, right? And I continued. One kind of begets the other. So that's sort of how, everyone said, oh, like this must have been, your aspiration or whatever, something that you were striving for. But it really just fell into me, I just one led to the other, because you have experience in one. So of course you build up your CV, and that's how you get another one and another one. So it just naturally happened. And I went back to that here because I thought maybe it'd be the closest to those discussions that I had in New York. It wasn't. It was fulfilling in other ways, but it certainly was either nonprofit, which I worked in, or retail. So that was my art experience here, working in galleries. And I like both of those things as well for different reasons. So I started working in the galleries and worked my way up. When I say up, I just mean, on to the next one, and the next one's a little bit bigger, a little bit flashier. And all along the way, I would have people coming into the galleries asking the same questions, artists, I mean, about the industry and how to navigate it. And so I thought, okay, instead of doing this every single time, why don't I just do it once and have one big seminar? So that's what I did. And then it was so well attended. I did it again, start offering it twice a year. And then Langara contacted me to make it into a course. So I did that in the evenings after working at the gallery. And then people asked for private consultations. So I did that on the weekends when I wasn't working at the gallery. And then basically all of that, the advisement, the consultations, it overtook the gallery part. But taking that final leap into making it into making it my sole job, what I do day in and day out it took me a long time.
Right. Yeah. Baby steps.
Yeah. And there were two baby, I think. I really, really leaned on the reputation, even though it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense in terms of what I enjoy doing more. It didn't make sense in terms of like monetarily. Everything pointed at the consultations make more sense. You should be doing that. But I didn't listen for a very long time. And then I finally did. And of course, the only thing I wish is that it happened sooner. But yeah, here we are, I think about 6-7 years into it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how it began. Very, very organically and with a lot of resistance.
Yeah, no, I remember you saying in the last conversation that we had that, there was slight fears of no one would take you seriously, or that you felt that working in galleries legitimized you. And there are those insecurities before you take leaps of faith into something else. I mean, I felt that before, so I know what you mean. You're just like, no, but my identity is this.
Absolutely. And I just thought the second I stopped, people would say, well, you don't work there anymore. How would you know? And nobody ever asked, and people didn't even know I had ever worked there. It was like that just got erased from my history. And I thought it meant something. And to others, it really didn't. It really doesn't.
It's so funny how the narratives in our heads, the loops that they create of just fear and insecurity, until you just make a tiny little step and you're like, oh, the flow of this water is pretty awesome.
Absolutely. And what's weird is that I've never asked somebody, hey, can I see your previous work experience and CV before you do any, like, I haven't asked my dentist where other places he's worked on, or, other mouths that he's worked on, or anything like that. I've never asked anybody to prove that they're an expert in their field before. And I'm not sure why I was so dead set on people asking me.
That's interesting.
I think it contributes, and I learned a lot there. And everything I'm telling my clients is because of my times in galleries, of course. But no one has ever said, okay, prove it or anything.
Yeah, that's nice. So Dazed and Confucius, full-time, 2016. Yeah. And there is another consultant that was once a client, and he works out of the Victoria office. So you've since expanded territory as well, and you have a small team of writers and web designers and admin. So that's wonderful that it's grown.
Yes, I think so. And, and we're feeling growing pains again. I think we are on the verge of expanding again. So that's scary and exciting. But I'm hoping to take a page from my old life and not wait on it so long.
Yeah. That's exciting for you. Are you feeling an expansion in your chest when you think of you expanding the practice too?
I think the same feeling I felt when I moved after 17 years into a new place. Like it's not so much, it's like the trepidation or anxiety around how tremendous amount of work there is to move, to do. You basically break everything down again to build it back up. And yes, that's exciting, but I haven't felt the excitement part yet. I feel the trepidation part more.
Do you feel excitement often?
I do, but about, the food's coming to the table. Like that's probably when I feel the most excited.
I'm with you on that one.
Yes. Right. Those kinds of things. So I feel, I think little tiny bursts of joy a lot, or, maybe I see a cat or dog on the street that I'm allowed to pet, like these sorts of things. But in terms of my own my own business, a lot of that comes from my dad and that extremely practical minded headspace that is like, okay, let me see the results before I before I show any excitement.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to know about being a great art consultant. And are there innate skills that you feel a great art consultant should have?
Yeah. So I think like any artist consultant or advisor or listener, I think it's important to meet the person where they are. And that's something in early days I had trouble with, where I felt like they needed to get the bang for their buck. I needed to give them the greatest experience I could possibly give them, which meant jam packing our 1 hour sessions or half hour sessions together with as much information as possible. Basically 4 years worth of art school plus another 2 years worth of business school rammed into half an hour. And it
They're
was
freaking out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was very overwhelming. And to me, it's nothing, because it's, to me, I see them on their, like, you are here mall map, and they need to get to, and they want to walk to Aritzia. And I'm like, okay, go down the left, turn right, and you get here, right? So I can see it. I can see them in the woods. That's no problem, right? But for them, they're in it, so they can't see it as well. So it's not as, it's overwhelming. That's basically what it comes down to. It can be really overwhelming to tell them steps. They're on step 3, and I tell them steps 4 to 100. So instead, after figuring this out, we'll talk about step 4 and 5.
I like the philosophy of meeting people where they are in terms of your job. I mean, for example, all great therapists, they meet you where you are, or a good friend will meet you where you are. So I really love that. Because,
yes. Or like a personal trainer.
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I've never gone to the gym, but I'm sure you just can't run a marathon right away. You have to work up to it.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah. And when an artist comes to you and approaches you to potentially work together, do you have this intuition when you meet them whether this person will have a sustainable, successful art career? Can you build someone into that?
Mm-hmm. I think everybody can be built into that. So again, just going back to that gym metaphor, it's just, you do the work and you will become stronger. That's just it. It's not magic. It's not a trick. It just is, right? So everybody can become stronger. But I get that question a lot. Like, do I ever see people who are beyond hope, or, who I'm like, oh, there's no chance here. Like, don't quit your day job. And the only times that I've maybe thought, okay, your goals are loftier than what you have or what you're able to put in, is only because of work ethic. It's only because they're just not willing to put in, or not able to put in the time that it will take, or they lack that patience, and both of those things it's trouble. Like, it doesn't make for a successful equation. You have to have patience, and you have to put in the time
and the practice.
Absolutely. Right. And so
something that you understand well, because when you were younger, you would practice over and over
right.
when you were drawing. Yeah, I mean, I attended your creative mornings, which a few months ago, and I thought it was so brilliant, and it was smart, and it was funny. I learned so much. I actually brought, you remember how you got us to draw something?
Yes.
I think I have it somewhere here.
Yeah, I see it.
Do you see it? Okay, so the running joke among my friends. So Pennylane made everybody in the Creative Mornings audience draw a self-portrait. And it's a running joke in my group of friends that I'm a terrible drawer. There's a game they love to play where you have to, everyone gets a card, you have to draw it and then pass it on, and someone needs to guess it. No one ever wants to be on the other side of me. I wouldn't want to be on the other side of me.
Yeah.
So I was actually quite proud of my self-portrait that I did here. I was like, wow, I think this is the most realistic.
The hair is really bang on.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm very proud of it.
It's very tiny too.
But yes, to go back to your talk, the theme was critical, and you had named 3 pillars that you sort of operate from when you're looking at this lens: intention, practice, and context. And I'd love for you to explain to listeners what you mean by that.
Sure. Just a little bit of background on the theme as well. It was the theme is critical. Creative Mornings has a different theme every month, and how I interpreted that was basically my job is to be critical about art and, good and bad art. And what's frustrating to me is that fine art, out of all the types of art, is like performing arts or poetry, writing, music. It's the only one that people find extremely subjective. So you're pretty much not allowed to say whether or not something is good or bad, because if you say that, you have to prove that in some way. And I find that frustrating because that is my entire being, my existence, and my, why people pay me money is based off of saying whether art is good or bad, right? And everything in between, of course. So my hope was to give some folks at least the tools that I use for determining whether something can be considered good art. And those were those 3 things. So intention, what were you getting at here? What was the message here? And have you hit it, right? How close are you to that message? Has it come across, and to whom, right? That's intention. Practice, and that is what we're saying, straight up doing something again and again. Skill. We cannot eliminate that. I think a lot of folks think that there's like a natural gift inside you, and you can't, and that might be the case, but you still have to practice. There's still skill involved. There's learning and mentorship and study. So that's skill, or practice rather. And the last one is context. And that's more about understanding where you are and how you're situated in the grand scheme of things, the time that you're in, the canon that you're in. What you're saying resonates more now, later, or before? Do you have a new way to look at an old idea? And that involves knowing who's come before you, who's alongside of you, and who's ahead.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's that last part, context.
Right. And knowing what's, like you said, what's happening in the world.
That's it.
And how are you commenting on it?
That's right. Yeah.
With your art.
And that matters about who's come before, I think.
Yeah. Right. I have a question that just popped into my mind, and I'm going to ask it now before I forget it. But I was reading this New York Times article about a very young artist in New York, I think 6 years old. I forget his name. It's a more recent article. And his paintings, they're selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I took a look at them, and I thought to myself, that looks pretty good for a 6-year-old. And I'm wondering, as an artist consultant, with someone who's that young, if he were, say, to be your client, how would you nurture him from such a young age to make sure that he just sort of stays on track with his talent?
Yeah. You know what? I have a lot of young clients, but they're not 6 years old young. Mm-hmm. They're like in their early 20s and such. And honestly, for him, I think it's important to just be a kid and live his life. And so that would be the main thing that I think I would just always come back to. Is this the thing that you want to do? Do you still want to do this? Do you still like doing this? And honestly, it's not that dissimilar from what I would tell my current clients. Is this still resonating with you? And when you wake up and before you go to sleep, do you still think about this and live, breathe, and taste this? Right? So, that's probably something I would, keep in mind for him.
Yeah.
To make sure that it still serves him. Right.
Because I was reading the article and looking at the image they took of him as a 6-year-old, and he's sort of leaning back on a couch, and his head was back, and he was looking at an angle at the camera, and I was like, this is a very artistic photo of this child. And I just got that pang of like, oh, I hope this isn't like watching a child TV or actor.
Yeah. It's
Or
you
film
hope
star.
it doesn't get weird.
Yeah,
You hope it doesn't
exactly.
Haley Joe Osment like out
Exactly.
of it. Totally.
Yeah.
And it might, you know,
Yeah,
money
I
and
guess.
fame, it always goes that way.
Right.
Can I ask, did the paintings, what genre were they? Were they realism or is it?
No,
was
they
it
weren't. They were more
abstraction?
surreal. I would
Okay.
say like a little bit Picasso, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. A little Picasso, a little, maybe more than that, than surreal. But they weren't realistic.
And were they figurative?
paintings.
Like of people?
Yeah.
Okay.
The one that stood out to me looked like, it almost looked like a Bored Ape NFT, but with Picasso like features.
Gotcha. So a
Yeah.
little bit graphic as well. Okay.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Neat.
Yeah. So
I mean, one big thing is that the more life he lives and the more he's exposed to other types of artwork, that will just change, I think.
Right,
So
right.
that would be something that I would strongly recommend. And again, I recommend that for, my clients from 6 to 60 to 100, that you keep art in your life, right? And that you see it with an open mind. It certainly is a pet peeve when they don't.
Right. I have a question more so about collecting, just being an art lover
Sure.
myself and, finding this call to maybe start a fledgling collection myself. I would just love your lens on what are the things that you feel I should keep in mind when I'm collecting works. I mean, I know that I should love the art that I buy and be passionate for it, but what makes for a meaningful, intentional collection?
Sure. That's a great question. Some folks like to think about whether the artwork will appreciate. So that's something that you might want to think about as well. So where this artist is at in their career, are they just kind of on the cusp of something huge, or are they kind of already in it and this sort of thing? You've had lots of great guests on your show who very much fit that description, and their work is definitely appreciating. So that's something to keep in mind. I think that's for a different type of collector who wants to, they're buying artwork a little bit like investing, right?
Yeah.
So stocks or something like that. So taking a look at who is creating the work and where they are in their career is one thing. For me, of course, especially with an early collection and buying small works, I have to connect with the work more than anything. And I also like to see whether or not something I already have similar things in my collection, right? So if it's something that is different and you're attracted to it, I think it's important to ask yourself, well, one, why? What is it about this piece that I'm attracted to? Will I think about it again? And how does it fit with the rest of my collection?
Right.
Which I really, which I think is really important as well. It's like buying clothing, right? If there's something a little bit outlandish out there, are there other things I could wear with it? Are there other things I could match with it? And this is, of course, in a salon hanging in your home. If you have a small home like I do, a salon hanging is particularly important. So it's like how these all kind of connect and rejig together like a puzzle. And what you'll find is that the most interesting collections are ones that are wildly varied. So old work with contemporary work, photography with painting, textured work with flat work, graphic work with realism, and everything in between. And when you put those next to each other and you have variety, that's when you have magic, I think.
Right. But yet it still all makes sense despite the medium.
As opposed to a bunch of one thing and then one outlier in there, right? So it's like if you're going to go different, go different.
I see. Yeah, because I know that there are, several collectors I know that typically collect around a theme, for example. And even if it's all different mediums, once you see it all, you're like, oh yes, this belongs to this private collection because this is the theme that they collect around.
Right.
So that it just ends up making sense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. But they could all look different. Exactly. So building something around a theme or concept is a wonderful way. I like to see where the holes are in my collection, try to fill them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So again, things that, maybe I don't have a lot of text-based pieces. I might look for a text-based piece and keep my eye out for that next time. Just like, again, I mean, I'm coming back to clothes, but I tend to be attracted to one thing, so I keep going for it, and then I have to stop myself. Do you ever do that, like in a store where you're like,
yeah,
I've picked up this same color and sweatshirt?
or silhouette, and you're like, I have a million of
Yes,
these.
exactly,
Not
right?
a million, but
Exactly, right? Like you're just attracted to it, and you know that about yourself. So maybe you have to, and you ask somebody, and they say, "Don't you have that
right
in blue? Don't you have that already?" And you're like, "Yep." And to you, you're like, "No, that's a little bit different. The sleeves are slightly shorter, but it's actually pretty much the same thing."
Yeah.
I have to stop myself and put it back in. Like, okay, let's change up this narrative a little bit. So
Right.
it's the same thing with artwork. We're attracted to something. Maybe try to unthink that.
Right. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of artists that are coming to mind that I've been closely watching. One of them is now in the Gagosian, and I'm like, okay, well, that's out of reach now. I mean, she's young and she's super talented, and she does this thing where they look like Renaissance women, but then their face, they have no face. It'll just be like their hair wrapped in an updo, and her face is wrapped in, like, the woman's face would be wrapped in hair and an updo, so you don't see the face, or it's flowers.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's so beautiful, but also
Haunting.
slightly haunting.
Yeah,
slightly
sure.
haunting. And then there's this great realist painter from Japan, Morimoto. It's Morimoto Studio, and I think he just did something in, I think, a show in Toronto. But I love his work, the way he portrays neon in painting. I'm like, wow. But I also feel like he's on the up right now too, like that
For a while now, for sure.
Okay,
for sure.
yes.
We spoke at a panel in New York together at the Brooklyn Academy of Music a long, long time ago. Actually, it was very exciting. But yes, absolutely.
Yes, yeah. So
another
again, I'm like attracted to they just got out of reach. Like, if you know,
for sure. And I think what I would do, May, is maybe, you put together something of these people, and then you ask somebody who's in the arts, like myself or other people, who is the equivalent of this person? That's what I ask some clients to do, ones that I'm selling to. And they're like, oh, I'm looking for something like this, but it can't be that. So who's the person, 5 steps down from that?
Right.
But working in the same ilk, right, as them.
Okay.
Yeah. Another fun thing to do is lots of friends will ask, Zoe has asked, and for example, to have me come and hang their space, like take everything down and rehang it again. And just things that they might not even think, like a letter somebody wrote you, or a little object or a keepsake from before, and just kind of have it all out, and then leave me alone with it for a couple hours. And then we rehang the space. And I've asked other people to do that for me.
Very cool.
Just kind of a new way of looking at things that you already have.
Right. I feel like this is one of the more one of the things I learned working at Rennie and having such proximity to the private collection and the art team there to ask a lot of questions. I remember learning and asking about curation, and it was so fascinating for me to, like, finally understand that when you walk into a museum or a space, that there's a story being told with placement. And I was blown away. There was one particular group show, and there was a painting that was on one of the walls when you were leaving, and there was a reason why Bob wanted it there. And I was like, wow, that reason was it. And I believe it was a handbag or an accessory. And he wanted to feel like it was an item that you were grabbing before you left the home.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I know I'm not doing that complete justice, but in telling that, what I'm trying to say is I didn't realize that there is a spatial storytelling that is happening, and that paintings or artwork is actually speaking to each other in a space.
Completely.
Which it blew my mind, and it makes me love museums and spaces like this even more.
And a good hang. Yeah. I always say, if you ever walk into a space, a gallery or museum, and you're like, wow, this looks good, but you don't know why, it's because of the curator. It's because of what we do to make it have that feeling and resonate. So, but you don't know why. Like, you can't super identify it, right? It's not because of something sensationalist that's happened and they've done this crazy thing or there's this huge sculpture or whatever. It's the energy that
it's like a subtle feeling.
It's a subtle feeling. I suppose it's like a feng shui, of a space, right? And that goes in the order in which you're putting things, and how exactly as you put it, they are playing off of each other and off of you, right? And where you are, everything's. So I always encourage my clients to. My first thing I say is like, have you gotten the floor plan of the space if they have a show coming up? And then I say, have you built the maquette of that space so that we can hang it together ahead of time,
Right.
In a tiny version of it, because the space is everything.
I mean, same thing with your home, how everything is placed and how it makes you feel. That's why people who have the means to hire interior designers to create this flow and this look. And you walk in, you're like, oh, I get it. Like this place is supposed to feel like a museum, or this place is supposed to feel rustic, country chic, or
You got
whatever,
it.
Yeah,
You got it. I can't even imagine what it would be like to have ownership of that, the means basically to make a space exactly as you want it to be.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I so much love learning about the art world all the time, and I believe it was Chris Rennie had suggested that I read this book called 7 Days in the Art World. Yeah, and he was just like, it just talks about various facets of the art business and maybe what happens within it. And I just remember being like, holy, there's so many cogs in this machine
For
of
sure.
the art world that
Totally.
I didn't understand before, but
And that's even just like
fascinated by.
one side of it too,
Totally,
right?
yeah. And it was a dishy kind of book as well. But I don't know if you heard of the Intersections podcast. It's sort of I guess it's newish. And is it Art Basel or Art Basil?
Basil.
Basil.
Yeah.
Okay, I always mess this up.
But
Basil.
people say
Interchange
both and
it.
everybody knows.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, it's the global art director of Art Basel that is the host of this show. And I listened to a couple of episodes, and I really, really enjoyed the episodes with Swizz Beatz,
Okay.
who, for people who don't know him, he's an award-winning musician and producer. He's also the husband of Alicia Keys, and also a prolific art collector right now. He's the Dean Collection, I believe it is. And another one with RM, who anyone who's into K-pop knows he's the leader of BTS. And both of them are people of color. They're both deeply intelligent. Their knowledge of art is impressive, and they're really passionate about collecting art for others to enjoy. And so I'm curious if you've observed anything about this new wave of newer POC collectors. And I know we're still talking about people who are still in privilege and can collect at this level, but I get the sense that they're truly collecting to share the art with the public and not just hoarding it for their own, just in their homes for no one to see, which I guess is fine too if that's what you want. But I don't know. I just thought it was really beautiful to see people of color who are fairly young creating these meaningful collections.
Completely. I think so too. And I do think it kind of harkens back to the original purpose. Well, I think that is the purpose of artwork, right? And I think that perhaps some of these new collectors are really, really tapping into that, these young up and coming collectors, which is that the purpose of art is meant to be shared, and it is meant to be in a public scene, right? And is meant to be interacted with and talked about, and it isn't meant to be tucked and hidden away. I sit on the board for VGH, the hospital collection, and that is really our mandate to the core, like again and again and again, is that art is supposed to make you feel, full stop, right? Just feel. And I think that is only applicable when that number is greater. We can make that happen as much as possible, rather than just me looking at the same piece and only me looking at that piece all the time, right? And what's lovely is that now there are a lot of different means to be able to share that. We don't have to just have truckloads of people coming through our home every day and looking at our collection and talking about it. Of course, whenever there is an open studio or open house, it's wonderful. But I completely understand that this is a private space, but we are able to share our collections more in so many different ways, on blogs, on online, on social media, and talk about them and interact with the community about them. And then it again brings artwork back to its original purpose.
Right. Yeah. I'm finding myself more and more sharing art that I like on my social. Even if it's just a share with no words from me. Just have a look at this.
I saw this.
It makes me feel this way, and I'm just curious if it'll make you feel a certain way. And
absolutely,
even if someone doesn't reach out to me,
I saw
hope
this.
It resonates,
it struck a chord. I hope it strikes a chord with you. I'm sharing it.
I'm gonna share. Yeah. So I am a huge fan of anime and animation.
I know. And dance.
And dance. Yeah. And so I'm curious to know if you've seen any of these kind of incredible animated shows. One is called Arcane.
No, but you did pass it on to me.
Yes.
May.
Oh, yes.
And I saw the other one, Love and the monsters, the robots.
Oh, yes.
That one.
Love, Sex and Robots.
Something like yes. I watched those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you haven't seen Arcane yet.
No.
But there's another one that I watched recently. So again, this is kind of I love this because I'm finding that musicians are finding all of these really new artistic ways to share their music. So Kid Cudi, he had a new album coming out.
Okay.
And so he created this full like 90-minute animation, and it was around a love story.
Amazing.
That featured music from the new album. It's called Intergalactic.
Wow.
And when I look at those types of animations, when I look at Arcane, I'm like, this is art, and then if you happen to, Arcane had the people who created it also did a 6-series documentary on how they made it.
Okay.
And I was blown away by the artists how hard they worked and the talent that went behind that animation.
Absolutely.
And so, I look at animation in the way that it's being done now. And, in the past too. That's art too. It's not
100%.
Just animation.
100%. And it is a pet peeve of mine when they are separated. Like, this is a little bit about what the Creative Mornings talk was about, how I think our default is traditional realism when we think about fine art and good art. And I sort of tried to explain why that is in that talk, why we keep defaulting to that. And I kind of tried to debunk why that is, right? And how that isn't exactly, how it makes no sense why we consider that on the highest platform, the best.
Yeah.
When all of these other types of media are better, frankly.
Yeah. And that intention and that practice is also put into it. And
100%.
Yeah. And with the Kid Cudi one, I was excited about the layers of artistry too, because Virgil Abloh, while he was still alive, did all the quote unquote costuming for the animation too. And he sadly passed before it came out, but they did a nice tribute of him in the parting shot of the animation. He just happened to be on a billboard with icon and quotations.
I love that. That's great. And it's just amazing how all of those, there's a lot of different moving pieces and a lot of different people to bring one thing together. It's not just one person doing everything, right? So,
and it takes years,
yes,
sometimes for these things. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Anyways, I just wanted to touch on that because, for me, animation is also art.
Well, it is the way that we can bring all those things together it's what I mean by this is the future of how we can actually sound, video, time-based media basically is the future, I think, because there's no limits to what you can do.
Right. I love that. And then just the idea of limitlessness is so beautiful in its way. So I'm wondering, I know I'm just watching the time here. I know that we're all short on time, so I'm respectful of yours. But I'd love to know what's exciting you about the art world right now. And also, what's disheartening about it?
Okay. I think just right off the bat, what's exciting to me is post COVID, how dramatically of a shift we've taken to self-selling and being able to do that online. And of course, that comes, that's indirectly tied as well to NFTs and the, of course, emergence of that and how it's thriving. But just because of, I will say, because of the pandemic, so many of us turned our focus to where we live, where we are, what we're surrounded by, and how important that is. And then turned to, okay, well, how am I going to find these things? And the internet was there. So that pivot in so many of my clients to selling online, selling themselves, is something I could have never imagined. And I also couldn't have imagined so much money being put into purchasing artwork, which is fantastic and actually like should have been the case the whole time. And let's keep it up. Let's continue to invest in our spaces, which until we were trapped in them, I don't think people cared about as much. So we saw, people bought a lot of stuff during the pandemic, and this was one of those things. Art was one of those things. And I think you also realized how important it was. So I find that exciting, and I find that momentum to be able to do things without the gallery, even though the gallery is wonderful, but without the four walls of the gallery. I find that super exciting. And your second question, what I'm disheartened by.
If there's anything that's disheartening.
I think that there is also an unfortunate sort of, and this is also tied very much, I think, to my first answer, which is strange. There's the downside to that as well, which is that it also breeds a culture that is quite consumer heavy, and and that sort of reflects on the work not taking the time that it needs, because it is moving quickly, or it is part of a trend, and a lot of people are on that trend, and then maybe the work suffers a little bit because of that. And then there are also a ton of copycats and just there's a lot of that, right? Like anything that becomes a trend, I think that's the word, right? That there's going to be, yes, if Gucci's made something, then eventually down the pipeline, H&M is going to make that thing, and we're going to see a lot of fast fashion and then a lot of waste. And so that naturally will happen in the art world as well with this, right? Yeah. So I think that's maybe the only downside, and what I see as a little bit disheartening at this time.
Yeah, of course, because it dilutes the original beauty and intent of
it. Dilutes the originality, and it
was.
Yeah, and it also I think it makes people lose sight of their own voice a little bit, because they're so saturated in the fact that self-selling is so possible, and that they see people doing such a great job in a very particular style, that they think, well, let me give that a try and do the exact same thing. But who knows if they would have never seen that, what they would have created.
Right. That's something very important to think about.
Yeah. So I think it stifles the unique process a little bit. The authentic process.
For those of us who love art and want to be a part of moving the fabric of arts and culture in any city forward, what are the things that we can actionably do to support art and artists in more ways than buying?
Yeah. Talking, I think. Again, back to the talk, just that pet peeve of mine being that I don't feel like people feel shy about talking about art. They feel like if they say something is good or bad, that they have to justify it. And then by justifying it, they feel like that is the equivalent of saying, I am a cultured person. I wear a top hat and a monocle, and I know things. And it's not. It's not. We talk about shows that we watch and music that we listen to with this passion that we're an expert. We live and die by the shows that we think are good. Okay. But for some reason, we don't talk about artwork that way. And I think it's a mixture between just saturation. Like, we don't see it enough. It's not part of our daily fabric enough. And confidence. So I think it's a kind of a two-pronged thing. So if we can boost those two things, and luckily they kind of go hand in hand, you see more of something, you feel more comfortable talking about it.
Absolutely.
Right? But also perhaps a little bit more of a devil may care attitude about saying whether you like something or not and why you like that thing or not. And it's okay to say that this thing that is $10 million is total trash. And it's okay to say that thing that people find tacky is awesome. You have to own it a bit.
Yeah.
We own it with everything else. I don't get why we don't own it with art. And you heard my talk. It is clearly a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah. I mean, I love this notion of talking about it because, when you look at art, it will make you feel a certain way. And we talk about our feelings. So maybe just start right there. But also, we're bad at talking about our feelings too. So
maybe start with that, examining
let's start
yourself.
with that.
But even you posting on, like what you said, just sharing an image and posting about it or anything. Once we start sharing, I think, and talking about art, we give it worth, right? We give it value. We identify it as something that is worth looking at and posting and talking about and spending time on and sharing. So if that's once, we can become a culture that isn't holding art and fine art in an ivory tower and just bringing it down to the people again, then just like TV and just like anything else, it's not just like the anime. It's not dissimilar from the art world. It is art itself. So let's talk about it.
Yeah. And also too, it's like, it's just appreciating art too. Like at the very end of it, just being like, someone created that.
Completely. And you can say
from their heart.
Totally. And it doesn't always have to be good. That's what I'm getting at as well. You can rip something apart, but you've given it time and therefore it's worth, right? So
it's your energy in a tangible form. And yeah,
totally.
So it's definitely worth something.
Yes.
You're worth your energy for sure. Well, the second to last question I have is, when you picture your younger self in a room drawing something over and over again, and you reflect on her as an adult now, if you were going to say something to that version of yourself just about life or what you've learned, what would you say?
Buy Bitcoin. I would say that. Right now, go smash the piggy bank and whatever coins you have in there, buy Bitcoin with that. Just kidding. I would say that I'm going to say this with the caveat that my younger self would not have listened to my future self. No way. But I would have still said, try not to sweat the small stuff so much, because there aren't just 3 jobs out there. There are so many nuanced positions and needs and purposes that fit these amazing liminal spaces that are hybrids of all sorts of different types of jobs. And, you don't have to. I think this is perhaps something I would say to a slightly older version of myself, but still, I think it started from there. There was 4 jobs at that time. And I always thought like you had to fit into one of those things, and drawing that thing over and over again so that the eye would be a perfect eye means nothing. That's not realism isn't the key. It's not perfection, right?
Right.
There are other things. Yeah.
I like that a lot. My final question that I ask everyone: with what you do, what is it that you want to leave behind in the world?
Yes. So I guess other than a massive art collection that I would leave behind, and a body that has like died from gluttony, and living life too hard. I would love to. I guess I'd love to leave behind a roadmap for artists to navigate getting from here to there and wherever that may be. And that roadmap, comes with a set of language tools that they can use to speak about their work and identify what it is about their practice that makes it weak or strong. And that language hopefully also asks a lot of questions for them to be curious as well. And maybe a toolkit for that road trip to get from here to there. So that if you get a flat tire, they can change it. If the engine overheats, they can cool it down, and those set of, I think I'm getting too deep into the metaphor, but basically a set of tools to be able to approach how to fix what ails you, and how to get from here to there, if in fact there is a here to there. Or maybe you just enjoy the drive and you keep tuning up the car whenever it overheats or shuts down or needs you, right? So and I definitely think those tools exist out there, but if I can add to that in any small way, which is what I'm trying to do right now, I hope that I can.
Yes, you have, and you will continue to. And I think that's really beautiful.
Thank you. Fingers crossed.
Really, really appreciate your time. And if you do leave this world from gluttony, let me just put on the record that Pennylane puts together a mean charcuterie plate.
That could be what I leave behind. I would be happy to leave a wonderful spread. Like, just at my funeral, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
The food, it better be.
The meats, cheeses will be like top notch.
Off the charts at my funeral. Get ready.
Oh, one more thing. If people want to find you, if
Yes.
artists want to reach out to you, how can they connect?
Yeah, they can find us on our website, dazedconfucius.com, and on our Instagram at dazed.and.confucius. And I think maybe you'll probably link to that somewhere.
It'll be in the show notes.
Great. Yeah. That's it.
And on Instagram. Pennylane, thank you for this conversation. I always enjoy them. I can't wait for more.
Oh, it was a blast.
Yes. When you are back, because you're leaving, aren't you?
I'm always leaving here and there. Yeah.
Well, whenever you're back and not leaving, I'd love another hang.
Please come over for a charcuterie board and a 6-hour conversation.
Yes. I look forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks, May.
As always, thank you for being here and for listening. To learn more about today's guest, visit the episode page for show notes and links on wearethecraft.com. You can find the entire podcast archive here or explore more conversations with past guests on Spotify and Apple. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button on these platforms, including YouTube, to get notified when new episodes drop. Any likes and shares on social media are deeply appreciated too. Sound and audio engineering for this show are by Andrew and Jay Bagaspis. All guest portraits and images are by Juno Kim. Appreciate you all and see you again soon.